What's going on, Workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're talking about if this game is alt unfriendly or is gearing just not any fun. This is coming from Final Fantasy XIV's Reddit discussion thread, so we'll include a link to this in the comments, or in the description, or maybe both. I don't know. But anyway, we're going to dive into this post, and we're going to break it down, give you guys our thoughts, and as always, we'd love to know your thoughts. But before we dive into this post, Chris, what do we got coming up this Friday? What do we want to share with people?
This Friday, we're going into Guild Wars 2 for the very first time. We're having Rook come on and talk to us for an hour for a podcast at 11 a.m. CST over on Twitch. That's where you can find us. Work to Game with the number 2. And along the way, I know a bunch of you got subs gifted to you this week, and we had a huge sub drive this morning for no reason, because people are amazing. And hopefully you subs enjoy that we now have a Sage emote added to the Reaper emote. So we are continuing to add more emotes. So if you wonder where your money goes, besides supporting Brian's diaper fund and supporting whatever it is that I do to survive, that's where they're going. We're buying cool stuff for stream. So spicy topic. I hope you're sitting down. I'm not. I'm loving the sit-stand desk.
Dude, it's a game changer. Sit-stand desk is a game changer.
This is a game changer.
Anyway.
So
yeah, take us into it.
They've named their character Alts, so I'm assuming that was for this post. I started playing this game last year, and you can play all the classes on the same character was one of the main reasons I chose this game.
Yep.
I hated having alts because I'm always a completionist on my main. So being able to quickly switch between jobs was very appealing, and it's a great idea overall.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely, 100% lootly. But I'm gonna TLDR. I really agree with this, what they're saying. Please continue.
So, some of this excitement went away when I realized that I could probably level all the classes on all races and redo a full story map exploration on the game like Guild Wars 2 in less time than it takes to level all classes to max level in this game. But I stuck with it because I like this game, and it's a long time investment that can be worth the wait, and I get it. It's a leveling focused game. I think that's a key thing to hone in on here. Every game has a portion assigned to leveling and a portion assigned to endgame. This game has a lot more about the journey, a lot more about the narrative experience, the leveling experience. That line is not in the middle. It's a whole lot more over here, where endgame is a big thing we focus on. But leveling up all your jobs, exploring all the narratives, even when you go into side content like Sorrows Overlit, it has its own story associated with it. It doesn't just dump you into the fights.
Yeah.
However, one thing that seems pretty much against this feature is the fact that if you are remotely serious about gear progression, you're going to have to commit to playing one job. It takes weeks or months to gear one job, and it isn't fun redoing the process. I imagine that by the time people are done with their first job, they probably won't really care much for the others, as they've already redone the content multiple times.
Yeah.
What's worse is that even if you want to gear all your jobs, you probably won't be able to do it in time for it to matter. That's how long it takes. All those jobs you spent weeks leveling just sit there, shelved with mediocre gear. So you can't have an unlimited number of drops from things like Eden. You have to have weekly lockout rates, because that's what says the people who can afford to run Eden 67 million times week 1 do not get to outpace the people who don't get to play it until their very first time Friday night, and they're not going to be able to play it again until the next lockout. You have to make those people able to play the same game, and you can't let people. That's what happens with the relic grinds, is people run away with the progression and they leave the casuals behind.
Yeah, hard to disagree. Completely disagree with that. On the concept of that, there definitely are systems and other ways that can go about it. Because essentially that casual player might run into situations where they've got more time, and so the system can even be restrictive on the casual player themselves. Like there have been times where casually I hit tome cap, and then that I couldn't, the only other option was to go and play another character, because I was literally being restricted, and I was like, but I'm not gonna have time tomorrow. Like, I'm not gonna be able to go until and it's like, now what? I'm locked out because I'm behind, and I'm going to remain that behind. I think that there's definitely systems in place now. 14 does some balancing, with actually crafted gear, and then we talk about the kind of the different avenues. So if you kind of pace it right, it isn't as restrictive as it can be. If you're only I only have tome gear in mind. And at the end of the day, also, and the biggest critique of it is that I don't think the gear matters. I think if essentially like you get into like the crafted gear and whatnot. Like overall, the gear helps, but it isn't it isn't that big of a difference maker, personally speaking, when it comes to actually knowing how your job plays. Like obviously it has a difference maker, but when you break it down to it, like I think if you were playing your job to perfection, you could probably out damage somebody in higher gear than you,
Sure.
who was just performing mediocrely. But anyway, that's just my disagreement. Go ahead.
All right, so he says, I know there's an argument in that you can clear anything but some raid fights on crafted gear, but what if you want to try something else on raids? Good luck having less DPS on your samurai than you have on your bard. It just adds frustration. And even if you don't raid, you want to see the results of spending those tomestones, right? Making level 80 content runs go faster and such. By the time you complete your first gear and you've already done your expert so much, you just want to do them as fast as possible. So you stick with your job. The best you can do is play another job that kind of shares the same gear, like Dancer and Bard. The grind tome/relic weapon. I can't imagine how being a melee main feels with 3 different gear sets, which I think is one of the reasons why it looks like there's 4 melee. You saw another melee get added, and you're like, why would they push it to 5? Why would they do that? And it's because they're starting to try to separate those melees out into gear sets.
I was even talking with you a little bit about this with like Black Mage, Red Mage, and Summoner. Like Summoner and Red Mage can share a lot of that because they have a lot of that. They don't have a massive need for cast speed, a lot of insta cast, a lot of things of that nature. And then when you take in Black Mage has a definitely need for skill speed. And so from a gear set perspective, my theory might be like if we do get another caster, it would be kind of to balance out like maybe a hard caster versus a quick caster kind of builds and stuff like that based off of the gear alone, based off of what Yoshi P's doing with Dragoon. Now Dragoon had maiming, nobody else had maiming gear. This will be good to see that ultimately, but yeah, let's go ahead and continue.
No, it's a nice way to finish out. It's just a reminder that you change your viewpoint even a little bit and the data looks different.
Yeah.
When you view them as roles, you're like, well, you would never put it as another melee. But then you shift that view to taking the same classes, but now sort them by gear set, and all of a sudden it makes total sense to add a melee. So it's all about what is their objective when they choose new classes. What is the new job supposed to fill? Is it a role within there? Is it literally roles within the different role quests, or however we're sorting those? Is it gear? Is it a task? What is that objective, or does it meet multiple of those?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's always been like this, but they should change something for a better progression. Something like, for example, if you have a piece of armor, gloves of aiming, buying a piece of the same type but for a different job, gloves of fending, now costs 50% less tomestones or books. Or having a 450 weekly limit being slowly increased as the weeks go by. It's just awful that if you get tired of your job, you have to do a hard reset and set back weeks of progress. I imagine if this game was more friendly towards playing more jobs, the in-game scene would benefit, as people would be more willing to test new jobs. At this point, my static just stopped playing once everyone was around 525 because it was good enough and people just don't care anymore. It's just not fun. In a few weeks, it went from I want to know how to play multiple roles to get all the jobs to 80 and embrace the you're supposed to unsub mentality.
So obviously the hardest line here is that last line because it sucks because they're not wrong. And I actually really like their idea in that regards. I would think I would lean more into kind of that weekly restriction cap kind of slightly being increased because if you have more time, the idea is that you don't, you look at it like a race, right? People are going to cap, but as you come into it, they do increase that lockout, but it's usually right before the expansion. But imagine seeing it like, okay, we're in the relevant Tombstone Moogle phase here starting March 15th. We just covered a video about that yesterday. Like imagine if like the first week's 450, second week's 450, maybe third week's 450, like within that like real big rush. And then maybe it's 500 and then maybe it's 550, so that all of a sudden if I come in, I'm like, you know what, I got some time now, I don't have to sit here and like be told to go play another character. And that's really what the lockout ends up driving people into. And here's the mindset where I've actually considered this during high available times, is that should I just make new characters and have that, now that I've got one character with all the classes, like everything's leveled, but should I just make another character that focuses in on role by role by role on things that share that same kind of gear. So that way, if I wanted to push up multiple roles, I have my healer character, I've got my damage character, got my caster character, and that ends up stressing me out because I'm like, I don't want it. That feels like
You're gonna have to clear every MSQ for every single one of those.
Everything.
No, I don't think it's worth it, especially as we talk about data center visit. Even if data center visit ends up only being region locked, NA to NA, EU to EU, JP to JP, you're still going to solve most of what people want to do with alts outside of RP and outside of people pushing BIS.
Yeah.
You're not pushing your best in slot gear where you need this. I like the idea of allowing them to get a second one. You do have to think part of the design of this is meant to keep people feeling like they have 16 weeks of content for a 16-week lull. So you can't just let people, open up the pantry and eat all of their food week one.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that was awesome. I had big epic meals every single day and I'm totally stuffed and it was wonderful. And then there's 15 weeks of them starving to death. And it's like, why didn't you tell me to take my time? I did. Like, nobody told you to go make multiple characters so that you could circumvent our system that is meant to slow you down. A weekly cap is by design. This is not they didn't even think about slowing you down. No, it is there to slow you down. It is a speed bump. I wouldn't mind seeing them move to like a weekly 7-day lockout. So your first week, the new tome drops, everybody's tied to Tuesday. But say you don't start it till Friday. Okay, well, the last time you received a tome was Friday, right? And so there's a rolling 450 cap. And so for people that get a little every day, maybe you skip a day, that allows you to binge that within your 7-day period. So I wouldn't mind them seeing that more of a rolling cap.
Yeah.
Or as the patch goes on, allow people to maybe get a little bit extra or slowly move to where like, hey, once you've completed a fending set, maybe once you complete a set, you get a bonus that now makes all future sets cheaper. So you're encouraged to finish out your main. I think one of the issues with relics is that they're very linear. Your first one's really hard. Your second one's a little bit less hard. And that's the amount hard it is for the remainder of them to get as far as total amount of content you have to clear. And it would be nice to see them stray at that. So it was like, hey, your first one's pretty hard. Your second one's a little less hard. And it kind of encourages you to, I think I was only going to get 4 relics, but now that I'm here, I might as well get 5 to kind of entice you to be invited deeper into the system than maybe you intended to go when you first started. Mm-hmm. What I think could also work for that is with things like Eden, right? When you talk about you could go ahead and say that you can get like 1 token from each like role. So you could kind of have your tokens, but then the problem becomes like what happens when you have an extra token. So like you could somehow, it would have to be a rework of the system, but like we've seen tier sets in other games and things like that, where like it would be nice if you got something that was maybe like, I don't know, maybe there's an additional token that's for what job you're running as or something like that, that lets you kind of speed it up just a little bit. Maybe you do have to run a second set of Edens each week, but I think the first week that's really fun. I would have run a second Eden. I think I did run a second Eden and I just didn't get loot. So I think something about the token system, I think somewhere in there's probably an opportunity for a rework that allows people to begin working on a second set a little bit quicker, so that it's like, yeah, your first set theoretical max is this many weeks, but then like your second set is really only a couple weeks behind it. So that your second time through, it's very, very quick.
I'm gonna highlight a comment here, and then I'm gonna kind of give an idea that I've got. And obviously, this is just my ideas. And when we talk about development, like there's lots of work involved, so nothing that we're sharing or sometimes it's not like an easy light switch kind of moment. I wish it was, and sometimes it is, but. Anyway, like King Bing Ding Dong, in this case, awesome name. I thumbs this up. Not only is gearing an issue, the weekly lockout ties your hands too if you want to play multiple jobs, as you're locked to any chests which are particularly only plentiful later in the week. And so basically saying, even in Savage, and then they go on to say, especially what irks them about them is that as people have cleared that, if you're running with more people, it removes the chest from the whole process. And so there's a lot of really good discussion going on in this thread. If you guys have not checked it out for yourself, again, the link will be in the description. But from my perspective, I would like to see something like, rather than overhauling the whole system, which I think would just be risky, there'd be work, they're bound to not get it right. And so you could almost feel like it would be a step back. Like the worst case scenario would be the system gets worse and it becomes like, holy crap, like it's now a job. Like they've turned 14 into a job, and I've got, but I'd like to see something tied to content, right? Like have a system that like a new piece of content, and again, I'll say it like M plus, like where all of a sudden you have another avenue for gear collection that can kind of offset that because at the end of the day, like when we talk about 510 gear, like I think when you go into the expansion, 490 is really all that you're going to ultimately need. You know, like that's going to be where they balance like everything out. You'll get gear that's going to fill that in. So there isn't like this massive demand to have the best in slot in this game unless you're actively trying to make Savage and Ultimate easier from a player's perspective. But if there was an interesting way that it's like kind of when you talk about a new piece of gear, I would make the content though, but I would tie it behind RNG. And one of the things that like the offset behind being that we have the static version of the lockout. The other way you go about it is that without having to introduce weekly lockouts, you tie it behind a low drop rate. And that would be RNG in that regards. So you end up having a system and you're getting stressed by it. But I'm saying you already have a pathway that's static. You already have a pathway that allows you to play and you're going to get a guaranteed drop. And then they're going to put walls in and say, okay, you got to wait. Why not have a system that has a rare and then that's also market tradable? So that if somebody wants to go and spend their time and spin their wheels and go and farm a piece of gear and they get something they like or they don't like and don't need, they can put it up on the market and you as a player can come by and just say, hey, by the way, I've made a lot of gil this week. I could go ahead and purchase that as well. And so having another avenue. And then to not completely destroy the crafting economy, allow crafters to take that piece of gear and then enhance that piece of gear as well, so that you could sit here and have this whole like little mini ecosystem that starts to get into more of player-driven economies as opposed to just straight up what we currently have now, and having to not even change anything that exists now, but add this as a whole new like avenue, another pillar for gear acquisition. Chris, what's your thought?
So you've tackled three separate things there, and one of them you even referenced World of Warcraft directly. And I will tell you all three of those are things that have been tried at WoW. And so when we reference WoW in these videos, a lot of people are like, I don't want anything like WoW. Well, I can tell you, this is actually the three things you've listed there. WoW has added and has since removed. And so our goal should be to learn from WoW and not to do. Learning from another game doesn't mean we have to copy them. It also means we can, watch
avoid
that guy
mistake.
run into a brick wall and go, I don't want to do that. And so the first is you talked about basically setting it so that people could run it with kind of like alts and things like this, not affecting the number of chests that drop. The reason you remove coffers like that is because what happens if you don't do that? And I'm not saying this is the best solution. I'm just explaining why we remove coffers. Is because if you don't remove coffers, then you make it better to run with a party that has half people who have not cleared for the week,
So
and
you
half
can start
people
funneling.
who have. So the people who have can send those over. WoW actually does that by armor type, and that gives a huge advantage to guilds that can run basically the equivalent of a maiming run and a fending run and an aiming run, where they are now you are expected to be competitive at the top level. And we've seen this start to happen in 14, where people were doing they were doing 2 clears a week, but you would quickly move to, well, why not 3 clears a week? Why not 4 clears a week? Why not 8 clears a week, where there's only one person in each party that's actually going to roll and take loot? And then everybody and so you would start to move to where that group has an advantage because that person is getting their pick of 8 pieces of loot, and then everybody else is going to pass or is an alt. And so it doesn't matter. And then that way all of the mains are geared out that much faster. The second thing you talked about is an alternate progression, things like Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus used to be an alternative way. And what ended up happening is the raiders who wanted to be in the world first race would come in and abuse the crap out of this system to get ahead once again. So now, once again, to be competitive in the Savage scene, to have a good parse, you're not only expected to raid, you're expected to raid and get your 15 a week mythic clears. And so now, once again, you have people who are in this tier being a whole group above because they went out and took advantage of another piece of content. And so this expansion, Mythic Plus, received a huge nerf. Now, unfortunately, that means the people in the Mythic Plus community felt singled out because they said, wait, just because this other guy comes in here and takes advantage of my content, I can't be as strong. And now that guy with Mythic gear can do better at Mythic Plus, pushing runs to 20s and things like that, well above the 15s, which is the theoretical like max that you need to do, but people like to push the keys higher. That's basically difficulty tiers. There is no additional rewards beyond tier 15, but there are people that like to see how high you continue to push it. Mythic gears allows you to go higher sooner because they cap the eye level early on, and then they affect the drop rates. And then the the last thing you talked about was random loot, making things market tradable. WoW does both of these things with BOE epics. And what it means is guilds that have coffers of 1 billion gold versus guilds that have coffers of 50 million gold play differently. They literally go around and they server hop. You have to pay money for that. You don't have a world visit system. So they're paying gold to buy things, to server transfer. They're going to other transfers. They're bidding out the market. And you basically end up with 2 top tier guilds, Limit and Method. Limit and, no, it wasn't Method this time. Who was the other one? The EU. But there was basically an EU guild and an NA, because Method's been dethroned there. And they were spending the most money. And so they were up in that top slot. And you only had one for EU and one for NA, because that's how much market share they bought. There wasn't room on NA for a second limit. Yeah. They were literally spending so much money that they were buying up all of these. And so gold became a pay to win mentality. And that becomes really, really dangerous in an economy standpoint. It sounds really good until you have somebody come in. I still
want it. Like you just saying all that, I say, that sounds awesome.
And so you have people bailing from WoW to come to 14 to get away from exactly the 3 things you just named. Yeah. And so I'm not saying they don't have value. There's a reason WoW tried them, but there's also a reason that WoW either nerfed them or is in the process of nerfing those things, because when they're baked into a system at a fundamental level, people will optimize the fun out of anything.
Oh yeah, gamers will optimize the
alt unfriendly is by design. This game doesn't, the number of account-wide keys was limited in their very DNA. They can't add every item as account-wide because they said they have a finite number of keys to give out. And so you have people buying things off the MOG station that aren't even account-wide. They paid real money for an item and it's not account-wide. This game is not designed to be account-wide. Yes, they allow you to create multiple characters per account, but you literally get a cheaper monthly subscription if you don't.
Yeah. At the core of it, though, like the multiple jobs on the same character was a mentality with cross-class, with all of these things. And all those reasons have gone away. And now it's just a system that I think holds back even Yoshi P and the dev team because they have to account for all this data. I think at the core of it, like if I was going to pick one thing out of all of this to kind of change, it would be to kind of get rid of the class system altogether and just make it the job system, because that's actually a big memory cost to the game itself. Like you actually have different UI setups for class and job, etc. And I think that would end up being something that could be easily then redistributed to the entire game client as a whole. But obviously, I think we're pretty far from that at its core. Anyhow, Chris, you got any final thoughts on this topic? It's an interesting topic.
I think it's a valid frustration. I think it's a valid frustration. And I think as we move to data center visit for most players, gearing, what we're talking about here, and on RP, are really the 2 biggest reasons remaining to create alts, depending on how data center visit is rolled out. I understand the frustration. I think that there's a lot they could do that would probably make one aspect of it better. I think the goal is that ideally they make 2 things better and only one thing worse. So whatever they do, whatever suggestion they follow, hopefully they follow it to a degree that it's overall better for the game, because I think a lot of the reasons that it is the way it is came from very intentional, good thinking. And then it just had maybe an unintended mistake, or they knew it had something to it that was distasteful, but it was the best they had, right? It did 6 things good and 1 thing bad. And they said, well, what are you going to do? Like nobody wins them all. And so hopefully whatever they do, like I think the cheaper thing, moving weekly lockouts from being Tuesday to Tuesday, realizing not everybody's life revolves around Tuesdays. Maybe it's a rolling 7 days. So if you don't play the new content till Friday, yours now is till next Friday before those tomes reset. So you can't have more than 450 tomes within a 7-day period. So that number is always adjusting how many you've gotten within your last 7 days. Yeah. So that if you have a binge session available one Friday, maybe you can grind the full 450, or maybe it's even 900 within a rolling 7-day, but then that kind of strays you. And maybe instead of a 7-day, maybe it's a rolling 14-day. Yeah. And so that lets you really binge hard, but then you're not going to be able to binge again for 2 weeks. I think there are some interesting ideas here. It's just about what can be implemented, and then how do the people playing at the optimal level, how do they break it?
Abuse it?
How do they abuse it? What are we giving up? Oh, it will. Yeah, people will immediately begin hard. The next post will immediately be, math math and optimization until we go, well, this seems really grindy and like it's going to suck, but we better get started.
Yeah.
Like they're just going to grind the fun all the way out of it.
So at its core, guys, the question remains to you. What do you guys like to see? What would be your best way for Alter Friendly? Do you like the current system and don't want any changes? There are no wrong answers. This is a discussion, so we'd always like to know.
We're not in charge.
We're not in charge. Yeah, you guys let us know. And then we'll go from there. Chris, thanks so much for your thoughts here. It's always great to get that WoW perspective, because as we dive into Guild Wars 2, it's going to be interesting to see, like, what do we like out of that game? Because, like you said, one of the core things that's interesting that I hope that we can bring to the channel in 2021 is just a perspective of like, man, they really nailed it in this game, and man, how would that translate into Final Fantasy? Or Final Fantasy really nails it here, how would we love to see it in that game as well? Because there's some really cool stuff coming out on the horizon, so we'll have to share that with you guys. Anyway, for Work to Game, my name is Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you in our next one, but until then,
take care.